Welcome to this demonstration of a simplified emergency ILS approach with locked controls. Today we're flying the Diamond DA40 TDI at Elmira, New York. Our primary mission is to demonstrate this approach using a locked yoke and locked pitch trim. I will not touch the yoke, I will not touch the pitch trim during the flight. The Diamond DA40 TDI is what we'll be flying. It's similar to the Diamond DA40NG, but it has, among other things, the old style round dial instrumentation rather than the modern glass panel. We'll be flying out of Elmira, New York. We'll be doing an ILS runway 24 into Elmira, and we're filming this on October 5th, 2020. Quick set of standard caveats. I won't read through them. I will remind you of the last one, that the opinions expressed in this video and throughout the course are my own. They're not official FAA policy, and essentially they're an answer to the question about what I would do with my experience, how I would respond to a variety of in-flight emergencies. For the record, here are the flight sim settings I'm using as I film this video in early October of 2020. And here are some details. So we're doing the ILS runway 24. The frequency is 109.1. This frequency is shared with the ILS 6 in Elmira. In the real world, tower would have either the ILS 24 or the ILS 6 turned on at any given time, not both. The sim doesn't do that, so you'll see when we fly what the indications are like, and I'll explain that as we do it here in a little bit. The actual inbound course is 242 degrees. We're going to pretend we don't know that. We'll set 240 in the CDI, and you'll find that because the localizer is fixed in space, it makes no difference in how we fly the airplane. The touchdown zone elevation is 955 feet. Add 200 feet. That gives us 1155 for the decision altitude. Take the 955, round up to the nearest 100, gives us 1,000. Add 2,000 to that. That gives us 3,000 until the glide slope, the intercept. Let's go fly. So let's hop in the sim. Let's go to the world map. I already have the Diamond DA40 TDI selected, and we'll search for Kilo Echo Lima Mike, Elmira, Corning Regional in Elmira. It's selected runway 24 for us. Let's check the flight conditions. I've got multiplayer off, air traffic off. We've got the world to ourselves. Weather and time is preset on clear skies, and the time slider is set for right about high noon. Let's go fly. So very quickly, as this is taking a few seconds to load up, the game plan for this one is we're going to take off on runway 24 and fly straight out. So we'll have to double back to come back over the airport, and then we'll do the procedure turn, double back, and fly the approach coming back in. We'll do the first part visually, and that way you get a chance to correlate some of the instrument indications that you see with what's happening outside. It says it's ready to fly. Let's click ready to fly. Now let's get set up for the takeoff here real quick. First thing I'm going to do is hit Control 1, and then I'm going to hit the arrow keys just to slide to the right to get set up. So let's start with the comm frequency. As always, I just like to toggle that, and that way tower can't bark at us, because we're going to be doing some stuff that tower might not like. But we got the world to ourselves. This is a simulator, so we're going to do what we want, right? I notice that there is a pitot heat warning. We can come down here and turn the pitot heat on with that switch. I prefer to do it with, and now that I turned it off, it's blinking caution. I prefer to hit Shift H and just use the keyboard shortcut for that. So the pitot heat is now on. Does not affect us on this particular flight, but it gets rid of the warning light. Okay, the frequency is 109.1. Now this is the course deviation indicator. Depending on which order you're seeing these videos, perhaps you've already seen this kind of instrument in the 152 and or the 172. In this particular airplane, it's driven from this Garmin GNS 430 avionics box. Ignore the placard that says limited to VFR use only. In some airplanes, the GPS is only set up and certified for VFR use, not official IFR use, but we can ignore that. We're not using this GPS portion today anyway, so it doesn't affect us. Okay, so the first thing I want you to note about the CDI is you have to think about where it is getting its data. Right now, see this GPS indication, and that matches this GPS indication in the lower left of the screen for the GNS 430. That's because it's trying to use GPS data from the box. We want to use the localizer frequency of 109.1. So first of all, let's make sure we've got the right data being sent to it, and the way to do that on the 430 is you hit the CDI button. Now you see the tooltip, when you mouse over it says switch between GPS or VOR/localizer to provide navigation output to either an external horizontal situation indicator or CD, and that should be CDI, course deviation indicator. So I'm going to do is hit that. That changes that to VLOC, and the GPS goes away. It's just a toggle, so you can hit it repeatedly and cycle back and forth. But we want it on VLOC here, and that way whatever it's picking up in the VOR or localizer frequency is what's being sent to the CDI. The ILS frequency is 109.1, and the way we change it, right now the highlighted part is in the communications portion of the box. We want to get it in the VLOC portion, so we push CV, and that just toggles it down here. You can push it repeatedly and toggle it back and forth. We want it down here. We want 109.1. So big knob, I'm going to use the mouse wheel. We'll get to 109. The little knob, I'll use the mouse wheel. So 109.1. And then I'll toggle it with the V because we want to toggle the VOR type frequency, not the communication. So V, 1091, took a second. The CDI became alive because it's showing something. Now, we want to do the ILS 24. We're going to assume 24, so I'm going to use the mouse wheel on that knob, set it for 240. Now, wink, wink, it's actually 242. That would make it very slightly harder for us to track it if we didn't know that, and we're pretending we don't know that initially, but either way you make adjustments, whatever adjustments are necessary to track this properly, so it has no material bearing on the flight in any meaningful way. It's very inconsequential, and even then it's only really fairly early on. Okay, so we've got the comm frequency set, we've got the nav frequency set, 109.1. In the real airplane we would use the audio panel and identify the Morse code. We're going to assume we've got the correct ILS set up here in the sim without monitoring the Morse code. We have the CDI set for the inbound course of 240, even though wink wink, that's technically wrong. The flaps, and you can just see them in the lower right, are set with one notch of flaps. I'm going to bring the flaps up. I'm using the button on my yoke. That green light shows us that the flaps are now up. The trim, we're just going to inherit the trim that we have. If I hit F and scroll down in this airplane, you could see that the takeoff notch, or that indicator, that black line, is somewhat back more towards the nose up direction than the takeoff tick mark. That's not necessarily a bad thing. For what it's worth, if I hit the end key, it brings us to the external view. You see the HUD. Down over here, it's showing that the trim is at 0.2. We'll just live with that. We're going to use the default setting. One other thing we need to do, we need to set up a custom view so that we understand what we're going to be looking at when we fly the instrument portion of the flight. I'm going to start by hitting Control 1. That tips us in here, and that's actually pretty much good enough. We could just barely see a little bit outside, not enough to be functional or cheating. There's no moving map that we see. I will take the mouse wheel, just put it over some part where there's nothing that it's clicking on, and if I scroll in, we're just zooming in a little bit, and that way we've taken out any hint of the horizon out there, so this will be strictly on instruments. To save this as a custom view, I'm going to do Control-Alt-1, and now when I hit Alt-1, it will take us to this custom view. Last thing we're going to do as we switch down here is turn the parking brake off. I like to do that with the Control numpad delete, and that'll be this lever that's over here, but Control numpad delete. The parking brakes are off. F, let's go fly. For these flights, especially ones where I'm not touching the yoke at all, I like to bring the power up to somewhere around half or so. Just get the airplane rolling, make sure it's on the center line. I'll bring the power up to full. By the way, the engine instrumentation right now is showing about a 100, almost a 100% power availability at 2300 RPM. As the airplane, whoops, as it darts off to the right, as the airplane gets up close to flying speed, I'm going to bring the power back a little bit to something like about the 75% throttle mark. Just continue some slow acceleration, and that way the nose doesn't rise up violently right at takeoff. So we'll just kind of get the airplane flying. I'm not touching the controls. I will not touch the yoke at any point during the flight or the pitch trim. So the nose has come up. Now that it's come up, it's had a few seconds to sort of stabilize. I'm going to just slowly, you can even see the load down here, something like 76%, 77%. I'm going to just slowly feed the power in a little bit to get the climb going. We're climbing up to 3,000 feet, and if we go a little above that, that's fine. looks like our trimmed airspeed is going to be right around 80, maybe 85 knots. Okay, so we're tracking pretty much the runway heading. The CDI, though, it thinks we're outbound on the ILS 6, and because we're outbound on the localizer as far as this is concerned, this is reverse sensing. See how it's to the left? Normally that would indicate that the course is to our left, but because it's reverse sensing, that means the course is to the right. So let's turn to the right a little bit. I'm just going to use rudder. So if I turn to the right, that's going to center that needle. So I'll park it here. We're on a heading now that's going to cut us across the localizer. So you can see the needle has centered and now continues to drift off to the right because reverse sensing, that's telling us the localizer is off to our left. That makes sense. You just saw me make a right turn. Let's make a slight turn to the left. So I'll turn a little bit to the left. I'll ballpark to about a 210 heading or so. It doesn't have to be exactly that. So as we come across to a 210 heading, that needle that was on the right, showing that the localizer course was to our left, just leveling the wings here. We just flew through the localizer, the extended runway center line, and the localizer is off to our right, as shown by the needle displacement to the left. So, not sure why the nose is tipping down there for a second. I think I let off the rudder a little bit. It's just fugoiding down. I'm going to go ahead and go Alt-1. We're going to go back. We get kind of a big fugoid up. So I'm going to try to capture the 3000. We've got a big fugoid up, so we're not going to catch it super easily. So I'm bringing the power back. I'm not looking per se at the load meter. You might look at it in sort of sense. What I'm doing with the throttle, I'm just kind of moving the throttle a skosh or a hair or a bit, you know, mentally and so on. So I'm going to play with the power a little bit, try to capture 3,000 feet. It's going to fugoid on me. This airplane tends to fugoid quite a bit, so this will be a challenge. In the meantime, we had crossed the localizer on this heading of about 210, 220. The bank angle's been kind of coming back a little bit. If you're picturing where we are, we've sort of drifted south of the localizer. So I'm going to make just kind of a right-hand teardrop-ish turn and try to intercept the localizer back inbound. So I'm playing with the power a little bit, trying to get it leveled about 3,000 feet. I'm adding some right rudder to get some bank going. And at this relatively slow speed, it doesn't take much bank to get a standard rate turn. If we were faster, it would take more bank to get the same rate of turn. Okay, so I'm thinking about a 60 heading is going to track us outbound. I don't know on this turn when we get to the 60 whether we will be back to the localizer for, remember, the ILS 6 right now is what the sim sort of thinks we're trying to do. Banking just a little more than I wanted, a little faster than standard rate. So let's try to keep the turn going at about standard rate. I'm bringing the power back a little bit. It's tough to read. The sunlight has kind of washed this out. Okay, we're coming through the localizer for runway 6 is what the sim thinks we're doing. So we're coming through it and still turning. So I need to keep the turn going. I need to come a little beyond the 060. Let's try a 070 or so. So somewhere about 065, and this doesn't work exactly when you're using rudder only the way it would if I was using aileron. It's a little tougher to capture these headings, but I'm just trying to get the wings level. That's going to stop or nearly stop the turn. Ended up on about a 75 coming through the localizer, so let's come back to the left a little bit, and roughly 060 should track it. Notice that even though I've got 240 set here, this instrument is behaving the way I expect it to with the localizer fixed in space. And currently the sim thinks that I'm trying to fly the localizer 6. Now, I don't know exactly where the airport is. I'm kind of guessing just from situational awareness. We've got another mile or two to go before we're over the airport. But as we get near the airport and over it, this needle becomes exceptionally sensitive. And when we go directly over the airport, that's a weird effect on that attitude indicator, the way the sunlight's kind of hitting it, making it blotchy. That's going to become super sensitive, and in fact we will lose the indication momentarily. Once we get on the northeast side of the airport, the sim is going to think that we're trying to do the localizer 24, flying it outbound on roughly the 60 heading, as I try to get back to the 60 heading because this airplane's wandering off. And why are we suddenly getting a big pitch fluid. You know what I think's going on? We're in the hills of New York. I think there are some winds that are swirling around. The sim does model that, and I think occasionally we're basically getting some downdrafts, and we're getting some big phugoids from the turbulence. Okay, I just noticed a change there related to the glide slope for what was really the ILS 6. Come on, airplane phugoid. That's ridiculous. This is going to be hard to do if there is this much turbulence. I'm gonna fight it. Okay, it's a reminder, in the real world you get what you get. So that's gonna make it a fight. All right, game on. Okay. I'm not sure whether we've passed the airport or not, frankly. I think that we have, so I'm going to park the 60 heading for a minute. I think we've just passed the airport, or we're just going over it now. Again, I don't have a DME, I'm not using anything with crossing radials, I don't have a moving map or GPS, anything like that. Okay, so we're either right above it, I think we just crossed over. Let's just be patient, let's park it on that 60 heading for a moment and see how we do. Okay, again, if we're very close, that needle's going to be super sensitive. At the moment we're so close, we're not even picking up the glide slope signal accurately, at least the way the sim is modeling it, so we're in so tight over the airport. I'm just going to park it on about the 60 heading for a moment and see what that gets us. When you get directly over the airport, you get that kind of confusion with the localizer type needles, if that's what you're doing. If you go right over a VOR station, you get to that zone of confusion. Okay, so I think this is at least starting to indicate the accurate signal now for the localizer. I'm ignoring that we're well above the glide slope because we're basically 2,000 feet above the airport right now. So let's try to park it on this heading. The airplane's fighting me a little bit. And let's think about what this is telling us. We're reverse sensing outbound on the ILS 24 on this approximately 60 heading. That needle to the left tells me that the localizer is actually to the right. So let's correct to the right. I'm going to go to about an 80 heading. I seem to have, I've been fighting the pitch with the power, by the way. So somewhere about an 80 heading. And one of the takeaways, I want you to get that needle's moving. So I'm going to park the wings here, hold this approximate heading, drag that needle in, and as it centers up, I'll go back left to about the 60 heading. This is just a reminder, among other things, for controllers who try this, or if you're merely just watching me sort of fight this in the sim. In a real emergency, when the pilot is heads down, single pilot IMC in a GA airplane, it can be very hard to be chasing all these needles, and it takes a lot of brain power. Again, I'm trying to narrate this and fly this with constraints, such as not using the controls at all. But it's very hard, especially if there's any turbulence, to keep that altitude pinned and so on. It's just one of those little reminders that when you're dealing with a pilot who's got an emergency and they're up to eyeballs and stuff, especially if they're IMC, it might be best to give them a block altitude so they don't have to chase it as much as they would and so on. And pilots might end up wandering around a little bit. Okay. I've been chasing the pitch here. We're definitely getting turbulence. I have no doubt about that at this point. That needle has gone back off to the left, which means the course is to the right. So I'm going to come back to the right, maybe about a 70 heading, drag that CDI needle back in for the localizer. Okay. In the meantime, what is this needle here, this horizontal needle, telling us about the glide slope? There's my 70, going back wings level. So what is this telling me right now? This tells me we're well above the glide slope, which makes sense. We're at about 3,000 feet, a little bit of a phugoid and or some turbulence right now. But we're close into the airport at 3,000 feet, so we're well above the glide slope. The needle says the glide slope is underneath us. Okay. Localizer needle. I gotta add a little bit more power, try to get this at 3,000 feet. Okay, the CDI localizer is telling us that we're centered. I'm going to come back left. That 60 or so heading that I've been targeting seems to be dragging us to the left. So let's try maybe a 65 or so as we go outbound. Now remember, sort of wink wink, it was 242 for the true inbound course, 062 for the correct. We're kind of assuming 240 and 060. And that's one of the reasons why this hasn't stayed as centered as I would like. But in effect, even if we didn't know that, we're sort of learning it. Okay, so It's slightly right, the localizer is slightly left of where we are. I'm just going to leave this heading, and it looks like it's doing pretty good for them. Meantime, notice that the glide slope needle is moving up. Okay, we are slightly above the 3,000 foot altitude that I'm targeting, and I'm having to correct the bank angle and heading here. But notice we're just slightly above the 3,000 feet. If we were at 3,000 feet, and if or when this glide slope indication is centered, that's going to tell us at the rise of 318 feet per nautical mile that we are right about 6.3 nautical miles from the planned touchdown point. We're just a little bit higher. We're pushing 3,200 as I correct back down. So when we intercept, we're probably just a little farther out on the order of, I don't know, 6.6 nautical miles. That's a guess. I'm not doing that kind of math in my head. But by the way, let's get ahead of the airplane. Looks like our trimmed airspeed with that trim setting that we inherited is right about 85 knots. Quick rule of thumb, the target vertical feet per minute is going to be your ground speed multiplied by 5. That's not exact, that's a rule of thumb. But our ground speed will be approximately equal to our indicated at this relatively low altitude and no wind, or little wind. So let's call it 90 to make the mental math easy. We've gone through the glide slope, we'll turn around in a minute. But 90 times 5 would be 450. So my heading wandered off here while I was doing that. I got to correct back a little bit. But 90 times 5 is 450. So our target descent rate to track the glide slope is going to be roughly 450 feet per minute. But we'll do whatever we need to do with minor adjustments to track the glide slope inbound. Okay, we've gone a little farther out. We're a little high, and we are underneath the glide slope. So it's about time to start the procedure turn. Now in this airplane, and I don't want to change the view here, I'll do it very small. You can use the transponder. Actually, I can do it. Let me hit function. Oh, it's not going to let me do it at this angle. But with that, you could start, stop, and there's a timer embedded in there. It's not letting me do it when I tilt the view at that angle, so let me ignore that. We'll just kind of ignore that. Meantime, I got distracted. I had not planned it. You have my word. But we kind of cut off to the right there. I'm going to fix that. Coincidentally, that sort of brought us back in. That was not anything I was trying to do. It's an indication that when you tilt your head down, you start looking and focusing on something else, the airplane can wander off in your hand. Like, okay, let's start the procedure turn. Let's just do kind of that 45-degree procedure turn. We'll do it to the right. So I'm going to go from the 60, and there's a tick mark here, so right about the 110. So let's go to a 110 heading. So about a standard rate turn. I'm going to do this without using or running the stopwatch. So I'm just going to kind of use a clock in my head and do this a little more rushed than you need to. So we're going to about the 110. So as we get to the 110, I'm going to stop it. Now, whatever amount of time we fly outbound, it tends to be the case that it takes about 15 seconds less inbound. So one way we could do this procedure turn, as that needle goes full-scale deflection because we've deliberately turned to the 110, I just have kind of this mental sense that since we rolled out of the turn, it's been ballpark 15 seconds. So I could turn now, and we would, about the time we turn back, we'd be probably intercepting the localizer. I'll give it a few more seconds. I am not running a clock or stopwatch. I'm guessing we're coming up on 30 seconds. So I'm going to start the turn now to the reciprocal heading from 110, which is 290, and I'm guessing we're only on the 290 heading for something like 15 seconds-ish, and then we'll be turning to intercept that CDI needle. Now, we'll get what we get, because who knows if I turn exactly standard rate on the initial right turn, if I'm holding exactly standard rate coming back, if there's any wind that's drifting us around, anything like that. But I'm guessing that ballpark 15 seconds on the 290 heading, and then we turn further left to roughly 240 to join the localizer inbound. Alright, let's see how we're doing here. I am multitasking quite a bit. Just a reminder, when you're hand flying on instruments, whether it's steam gauges or not, but harder on the so-called steam gauges, there's a lot going on, and the pilot is definitely multitasking. Coming through 330, I like the bank angle, pitch angle's fine. The speed is taking care of itself because I'm using the pitch trim. About standard rate, I'm just a tad high, I can live with that. As I come up on the 290, it actually looks like I'm just going to keep the turn going because that CDI needle is centering, showing that we're coming up on the localizer center line, we can start to read the power readout. Now the sunlight's no longer washing over it. So we're about centered, so I should be able to just kind of keep this going to right about 240. Now wink wink, it'll be 242. But let's try to go to a 240. We'll stop the turn about here with the rudder, roll wings level, and I'm guessing 240-ish should keep the localizer needle centered. I'm going slightly back to the right because we've gone slightly past the 240. So let's go left rudder, wings level, hold it there, wings level, stop the turn. We've rolled out on a 245. Let's see how that does. We're just a tad high. That's not a problem. Because we're a tad high, we'll actually intercept just a tad farther out. If anything, that gives us a little extra time on the approach. At the moment, as I've been playing with the power, we're ballpark 38% on the engine load. Okay, so let's see how we're doing here. And I want to get into a pace where we kind of go back and forth between sort of a lateral scan and a vertical scan. The speed will pretty much take care of itself, apart from any real phugoids or turbulence. So let's kind of do a lateral scan. Well, I like that we're wings level. That's showing no turn. We're parked on about a 250 right now. And this needle's slowly dragging in. So let's adjust slightly left. I'm just going to do a little bit of left rudder, just maybe 5 degrees of bank for about 1001, 1002, 1003. Right rudder. Level the wings. That should stop the turn. It might take a second the way that instrument indicates. We've moved over to ballpark 244. Okay, and let's see, that needle is very slightly right of us. Let's just live with that for a minute. Now let's check the vertical. About level, it's doing a little bit of a phugoid, and that one might be turbulence. We're about 3,200. The localizer, sorry, the glide slope is above us. We are underneath it. Okay, that takes care of itself. We've got to come a little to the right, so let's just a little bit of right rudder, maybe 5 degrees, 1001, 1002. Left rudder, get the wings level. That'll settle down in a second. We'll cross-check it. Looks like we came a little farther right than I thought we might. We're leveled about 32, and we're about up on glide slope intercept. Remember, we're about 90 times 5, 450. It'll take about 450-ish feet per minute to track the glide slope. We've gone through the localizer. Boy, we drifted right there. That turn had not settled down. You got to pay attention to this thing or it'll wander off, and that's similar to the way the real-world airplane behaves. So I've gone more like a 10-degree bank. We're coming over to about a 240. Let's park it right about here, so some right rudder. Got to really keep a close eye on that. See if that settles down, this settles down, that's coming back in. We're coming up on glide slope intercept, so let's pull the power back. You can see I'm going from 38 to ballpark, I don't know, 21-ish. We'll kind of see what that gets us. So it's starting with a phugoid, so it's overshot the 450, but I think that's a phugoid. It'll come back up and we'll see what we get. We want to keep a close eye on that. Meantime, go back to the lateral. That's slightly right. It seems like this 240-ish drifts us a little to the left, so I'm thinking 245-ish is what will hold it. Not positive. Okay, so wings level. Let's try to hold about the 245. So level, no turn. We're about 248, 249. It's slightly right. Okay, the glide slope is about centered, and we're about 500-ish feet per minute. So let's just kind of live with this 22% power setting. Okay, our first big target as we descend is 2155. That's 1,000 feet above the DA. We want to definitely see where we're at when we're 1,000 feet above the DA. In the meantime, let's pace our scan. Let's do lateral, let's do vertical. Lateral, it's a little to the right. 250 should bring us back in. Let's kind of live with that for a moment. So just leave it, leave it, leave it. See if that needle comes back in. Speed's taking care of itself. We're just slightly high. I'm going to bring the power back just a little bit. You kind of see it go from 22 to, what, 18 or so? And let's see what that does. This should tip down, and we should hopefully work our way gently down to the glide slope. Okay, CDI needle's about centered. We've drifted slightly right. Man, and I kind of get the sense like for whatever reason, 248-ish is what's going to keep us on the localizer. So we'll see what we get. So let's center the wings, level the wings. That should stop the turn. 246-ish. CDI centered, I like it. Speed's taking care of itself. Vertical, we're still a little high. I'm going to bring the power back just a little more. You see it drip from 18 to what, 15, but I'm just pulling it back a skosh in my mind. Okay, let's check the lateral. Centered, 250 wings level. I like that, taking care of itself. And we're coming up on 2155, 1,000 feet to the DA. 1,000 feet to the DA. Okay, so we got about 2 more minutes before we get to the decision altitude. Let's check the lateral. Centered, about the 250, wings level, I like it. Speed's taking care of itself, thank you, trim. And we're doing 500, 600, maybe about 600-ish average. I think we're slowly working our way down. Let's add the power a little bit. I'm just bumping it up a hair. It's getting us up somewhere around 17 or 18, it looks like. Okay, lateral, centered. We're about 245, maybe drifting left. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of right rudder. But I like the lateral. Speed's taking care of itself. I like the vertical glide slope, and turns out about 500-ish, maybe. Cool. This is looking good right now. Watch turbulence upset us. Our next target is 1655, and that's 500 to the DA. Wandered a little bit to the right. Wandered a little bit to the right. Let's correct that because that needle's going to start to drift. Okay, there's 500 to the DA. It's getting close to pucker time, folks. So let's go wings level on about this heading here. Try to keep that CDI needle centered. So level, no, about 246. Yeah, slightly left of us. Speed's taking care of itself. We're drifting just slightly below the glide slope. I'm going to add just a little bit of power. You might see the load go up to about 20% engine power. Next target is 1355. We're almost there. Let's do a little left lateral correction. The localizer is just left of us. So here's a 245-ish. That's probably pretty good. Maybe just a tick farther left. Let's get this centered. So wings level, stop the turn. That's good. Should bring it back in. We are 100 from the DA. I did not announce the 200. Okay, those are centered, but we've got movement. Those become very sensitive as we come in. Let's make a last correction to about the 245 that we think is good. Let's not chase the needle as it becomes ultra sensitive. We are very slightly high. That's fine. Here's the DA, F, and let's just finish the landing visually. I'm going to make a slight correction to the right. I'll leave the power where it's at. You see the VASI lights to the right, showing that we're on the visual glide path, which may or may not be aligned with the 3-degree ILS glide slope. That's showing we're just technically very slightly high. Doesn't affect us. A little bit of left rudder to correct back to the center line. As we get down to about treetop-ish height, I'm going to add just a tiny bit of power, and that was even too much. I'm going to chop it. This will be a thunker because I'm not touching the elevator. Let's give it a burst of power, see if that stops the nose from coming down. Let's do another burst. That's going to cause us to float. I'm trying to not thunk the nose wheel. And one last one. That would be a little harder on the real engine. Let's see if we can kind of grease it on. Never touch the yoke. Welcome back to beautiful Elmira, Corning Regional Airport in Elmira, New York. Cool. All right. So you got to see what this looks like. We could build a simplified version of the ILS approach using just the airport name identifier. By the way, the brakes on this thing are lousy. I'm like standing on the brakes at idle power, and we're like going way down to the end. Yeah, we landed a little long, but still. ILS 2.4, we needed 109.1. In the sim, we kind of needed to know that there was a reciprocal ILS 6 that was also turned on. And we needed the airport elevation so that we could calculate our altitudes. But other than that, that's the essentials of what an ILS approach was. We could have used the official chart and whatever, but the flying part, especially once you get to that final approach fix and start tracking things in this airplane using the CDI, it's flown the same way that I flew it there. There's a lot of back and forth between checking your lateral alignment with the localizer, making these little corrections. You just turn a little bit and you try to work out as you get closer what the good heading is. Make some small corrections. We left the flaps up for this one, but in any case, we did this in the entire flight. I never touched the pitch trim, never touched the yoke. This is part of what I call Karate Kid training. It might look like this is an unrealistic flight, but if you think about it, we're learning principles that are going to apply for later emergencies. You learn it takes some power to track a 3-degree glide slope even with the flaps up. Folks, if we have an engine failure, and let's stop short of runway 1028 here and set the parking brake so we don't cross an active runway. You learn that it's in an engine failure, you're going to come down steeper than a 3-degree glide slope. I don't know why I did that. I don't stutter. You also learned some principles about how to do VFR and IMC flight, because what did we just do? We did IMC flight. If you keep your bank angle 0 or close to it, that provides a basis for everything else sorting itself out. You see, you just take some small adjustments, be patient, try to get mentally ahead of the airplane. So anyway, thank you very much. Welcome to beautiful Elmira, New York, and I hope to see you on some later videos. Thank you.